Hi friends, welcome to this lecture and live demonstration where we'll be discussing about how we can build a simple text-to-speech application with NLP sentiment analysis in Python. This application is not a complete application, but rather a proof of concept application that illustrates how we can easily start building such applications by using different libraries. My name is Artemagis Artemiou, and I'll be guiding you throughout this lecture and live demonstration. So, the purpose of this presentation and live demonstration is to introduce an AI application that utilizes text-to-speech technology with emotion modulation. And by mentioning emotion modulation, this is NLP, that is natural language processing sentiment analysis, and via this technology, our application will be able to analyze the given user input and respond in the proper tone. This simple application will be implemented in Python. Now, as mentioned before, our application leverages the power of existing libraries to seamlessly integrate text-to-speech functionality and sentiment analysis. These libraries provide robust capabilities, thus allowing us to focus on enhancing user experience. To this end, we'll be using the TTS library for text-to-speech capabilities. We can install this library using the pip utility, so the command line is pip install pyttsx3, and you can learn more about this library on the following link. Also, we'll be installing and using the TextBlob library for sentiment analysis, and by using the below two commands, we can install this library, and you can also learn more about this library and how you can use it by following the below link. Now, before jumping into the live demonstration, let's talk about the structure of our code in order to better understand how I developed this simple yet powerful AI application. So, the first step in the code is to initialize the engine. Of course, prior to doing that, you need to import the relevant libraries, that is the two libraries mentioned in the previous slide. So after doing that, that is after importing the libraries, we need to initialize the engine. We can do that by calling the init function of the pyttsx3 library. So I achieve this using this line of code. The next step is to define a custom function. I named this function speak with emotion, which consists the heart of our application. So this function analyzes the sentiment of input text and adjusts different voice parameters accordingly to imbue the spoken words with emotion. That is creating a more engaging and empathetic interaction. Now, two key points about our function. Note that in this function, I use the polarity that is retrieved from the sentiment analysis from the text. I will talk about this right after the key points. So I use this polarity and I set different voice parameters like rate, volume, pitch, and voice. So the main criterion for this, as mentioned before, is the calculated sentiment polarity option. So at this point, it's important to discuss more about the polarity option in the speak with emotion function, which actually refers to the sentiment polarity score calculated by the TextBlob library. So in natural language processing, that is NLP, sentiment analysis involves determining the emotional tone or polarity of a piece of text. So the polarity score typically ranges from -1 to 1, where negative values indicate negative sentiment, positive values indicate positive sentiment, and 0 indicates neutral sentiment. So I use this score in my code in order to properly set different voice parameters, thus being able to express sympathy or excitement or give back a neutral response. And last, before jumping into the code, let's check the program flow. So the first step is to get the user input. Next, the second step is to perform sentiment analysis. That is, analyze the text provided by the user in order to calculate the polarity and decide whether my application should respond back with an empathetic tone or excitement tone or in a neutral tone. And this brings us to the third step, that is setting voice parameters. So based on the calculated polarity option, I will be setting the voice parameters. As you will see in the code, I use branching logic in order to do that. And finally, I compose text-to-speech along with using the voice parameters set in the previous step. So this is an ongoing loop where it allows the user to keep on entering text in order to compose speech using this text and also with applying sentiment analysis. So this is a loop and it stops when the user closes the application or types the cue character along with pressing enter. Great, so now we are ready to proceed to our live demonstration where we'll be analyzing the code and run the program in order to give it a try. So this is my code. So you can see here the first two lines of my code import the two libraries that I need for achieving the purpose of this application. So I'm importing TTS3, that is the library that allows me to compose speech from text, and the TextBlob library that allows me to perform sentiment analysis using NLP technology on the given text in order to set the proper voice parameters. And the next step is to initialize the engine like we discussed in the lecture. I do that using a call to the init function of the TTS3 library. Then I define my speak with emotion custom function. So let's open this code block. So you can see here I'm setting default voice parameters. So in order to show empathy or excitement or any other emotions, you need to play with different voice parameters. And for the purpose of this application, of this proof of concept application, I'm using 4 parameters. So actually I'm using 3 parameters because the voice parameter is always the same in this example. So first I need to set some default voice parameters. So I set the rate to 175. I set the volume to 1, that is the normal volume, and I set the pitch to 50, that is the normal pitch. Of course, you can see here the 4th parameter, that is the voice parameter. I set the default voice. I won't be changing this setting in this example, so this is always the same. Now, you can see here I have some if, elif, and else code blocks where I check the sentiment polarity option in order to determine what voice parameters I need to define in order to show empathy, for example, or excitement, or respond back in a neutral tone. So when the polarity is larger than 0, that means that this is a positive sentiment. So I try to make my response more exciting, so I change the rate to 185, so I increase the speech rate for positive sentiment. I also increase the volume for showing enthusiasm with my response, and I also raise the pitch for showing excitement. And with the engine.say function, I compose speech based on the text given by the user, but I also add another phrase here in the generated speech that is great to hear that. So I'm showing excitement based on the calculated polarity, which in this case is positive. That means that this is a positive sentiment. Now, if the sentiment polarity is a negative number that is below 0, that means that the sentiment analysis calculated a negative sentiment, and I need to set the voice parameters in order to show empathy or sympathy with the response generated for the user. So let's write here empathy as well. Okay. So I change the rate of my voice parameters to 150. So I actually decrease the speech rate for a negative sentiment in order for expressing a negative sentiment. I also decrease the volume for simulating soberness, and I also lower the pitch for expressing sadness. Also, along with composing the speech, again based on the user's input, I add another phrase after generating the speech, I add an extra phrase like I did before, but this time I'm adding the phrase, "I'm sorry to hear that," in order to make the response even more empathetic. Now, if the polarity is a 0, I just compose the speech based on the text given by the user by using the default voice parameters set in the beginning of our function's definition. Okay, so I'm setting the parameters and I run the speech engine in order to compose the speech and provide it back to the user using the audio output of the computer. So let's minimize this. And after the definition of our function, we can see here I'm just creating a simple input loop where I allow the user to enter text in order to be used for composing speech. And whenever the user enters text and presses the enter button, then sentiment analysis is performed and the corresponding speech is composed using the applied voice parameters. Now, if the user presses the Q button along with enter, the application closes, and of course, prior to doing that, the voice engine stops. So prior to running our application, you can see here I got some warnings. However, I have installed these libraries because prior to recording this session, I tested my application, of course. But since I changed the location of my file, I get these warnings. If you don't have these libraries installed and you are trying to reproduce this demo, you can do so by using these 3 commands. The first command for the pyttsx3 library using the pp utility, and the other 2 lines here for installing the TextBlob library with its dependencies. These commands were also provided in the lecture before this live demonstration. So what I need to do now, actually, I won't be trying to install the libraries because, as said earlier, I already have these libraries. Let me show you that. You can see requirement already satisfied. It means that the library is already installed. I can try to do the same with TextBlob. You see, and of course, let's do this as well. Okay, so I already had that. You can see it's already up to date, etc. So I just wanted to show you the process of installing the libraries with their dependencies. Let's close the command line. Let's minimize that. And in order to use this, I will just exit Visual Studio Code, which is my IDE for developing my Python applications. Of course, you can use any other IDE you like, given that you have also installed Python and any other dependencies required. So let's exit. Let's start Visual Studio Code again. And you can see that now I don't get any warnings because, as said earlier, I have already installed these 2 libraries. Okay, now let's run our application. We'll be using Python debugger. So let's enter a text.
You said, "I'm very happy because I finished my project in time." Great to hear that.
So you can see that I have written a positive phrase here, that I'm very happy because I finished my project in time, and the composed speech was also in an excited tone since my text was analyzed by the TextBlob library and it had the positive polarity, so the voice parameters were adjusted accordingly in order to express excitement in the composed speech. So my program, along with composing to speech the text I provided it with, it also composed the phrase great to hear that, because the polarity of my text was calculated as a positive polarity option. Now, let me write a negative sentiment. So, let's say I'm very sad because I have not finished my project in time.
You said, I'm very sad because I have not finished my project in time. I'm sorry to hear that.
So now you can see that the composed speech was empathetic. So in this case, the calculated polarity was negative number, that is below 0. That means the analysis of my text gave back a negative sentiment. So based on this logic, my application used different voice parameters, like I explained before, while analyzing the code, and it decreased the speech rate for expressing negative sentiment, decreased the volume for expressing somberness, along with lowering the pitch for expressing sadness. Along with that, along with the generated speech, my application also generated speech for the phrase "I'm sorry to hear that" in order to express even more empathy to the negative sentiment. So let's try some more sentences here.
You said, I like going trips with my car.
Now you can see that that was a neutral response, since I haven't expressed any enthusiasm or sadness when providing the text to my program. So in this case, the default voice settings were used. Let me write now another negative sentiment. I will be also using a sad face here, so you can see that the composed speech will say that this is a sad face and not a semicolon with a parenthesis.
You said, my car just broke and I feel sad, sad face. I'm sorry to hear that.
You can see, so that's really great. And now, before closing this live demonstration, let's write another neutral sentence here.
You said, the sky is blue.
So you can see that was a sentence that had a neutral sentiment. So the generated speech was normal. So it actually used the default voice parameters. So it didn't express empathy or excitement. It was neutral. So whatever I passed as text, it was composed to speech along with applying the default voice parameters. So you can see that was a simple text-to-speech application with AI capabilities, and more specifically NLP capabilities, that is sentiment analysis, where my program analyzed the text I provided it with in order to perform sentiment analysis, set the proper voice parameters, and compose the speech using these settings in order to express either enthusiasm and excitement, or empathy and sympathy, or even compose a neutral response. Thank you very much for watching this live demonstration.